Franz Stangl, a seemingly ordinary Austrian police officer, would become one of the most notorious figures of the Holocaust. As the commandant of Treblinka, the second deadliest Nazi extermination camp, Stangl was responsible for the systematic murder of almost 900,000 Jews. Born in 1908, Stangl's path to becoming a mass murderer was paved by the Nazi regime's twisted ideology, which transformed him from a civil servant into a cold, calculating killer. Treblinka was the epicenter of the final solution, where Jews from Poland and other Nazi-occupied territories were sent to die in gas chambers. Unlike concentration camps, Treblinka was a death factory with one singular purpose: murder on an industrial scale. Stangl's efficiency in overseeing this machine of death earned him a reputation as one of the Holocaust's deadliest architects, second only to the likes of Adolf Eichmann and Heinrich Himmler. Stangl wanted power, authority, and advancement within the Nazi hierarchy. As an ambitious officer who found his way into the Action T4 euthanasia program, Stangl's role was to oversee the extermination of disabled people in Germany. His ruthless efficiency caught the eye of his superiors, leading to his transfer to Sobibor and later Treblinka, where his true legacy of horror would be written. Stangl's rise in the Nazi ranks was fueled by his desire to not only prove himself loyal to the Third Reich, but to fulfill its genocidal ambitions. He wanted to be remembered as a model officer, someone who could execute orders without hesitation, a man who could organize the murder of hundreds of thousands as dispassionately as one might manage a factory. The killing of 900,000 Jews under his command wasn't just a task. It was, in his mind, a duty. Stangl's vision of a long, successful career within the Nazi regime began to unravel as World War II turned against the Germans. The Nazi Empire, once feared as an unstoppable force, was gradually pushed back by Allied advances. The horrors of Treblinka were revealed to the world after the camp was dismantled in late 1943, leaving Stangl and other high-ranking officers to flee into hiding. Despite Stangl's attempts to distance himself from his crimes, the world was closing in on him. After the war, Stangl evaded capture for years using the infamous rat lines that allowed Nazi war criminals to flee Europe to South America. With the help of sympathetic networks, including corrupt elements of the Vatican, Stangl made his way to Brazil in 1951. Though he managed to avoid justice for over 2 decades, Stangl's brutal past haunted him. Nazi hunters and survivors of the Holocaust continued to pursue those responsible for the genocide, and the world's appetite for justice never waned. Stangl, like many other Nazi fugitives, could not hide forever. As the walls began to close in, Stangl tried to build a new life in Brazil. He lived a relatively quiet life under a false name, working as a mechanic and blending into the expatriate community. His attempt to bury his dark past, however, could not protect him from the long arm of justice. The determination of Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal and Holocaust survivors who refused to let the atrocities of Treblinka be forgotten eventually led to Stangl's capture. In 1967, Stangl was finally arrested by Brazilian authorities and extradited to West Germany to face trial for his role in the Holocaust. During his trial in 1970, Stangl defended himself by claiming he was merely following orders, a defense used by many Nazi war criminals. He maintained that he was a cog in the machine, not personally responsible for the deaths of nearly 1 million people. "My conscience is clear," he told the court. "I was doing my duty." But no one was convinced by his hollow justification. The evidence was overwhelming. Stangl had been a willing participant in genocide, not a passive observer. Stangl's argument that he was simply following orders did not save him from conviction. The Nuremberg trials had already established that just following orders was not a valid defense for war crimes, particularly in the case of mass murder on the scale of Treblinka. The court was clear. Stangl had not only carried out orders, but had taken an active role in the efficient extermination of nearly 1 million Jews. Survivors of Treblinka testified against him, recounting the horrors they had witnessed under his command. They described how Stangl would walk through the camp in a white uniform, observing the gas chambers and the mass graves with cold detachment. His presence was a constant reminder that death was imminent. One survivor recounted how Stangl seemed utterly indifferent to the suffering and death all around him, as if it were merely a part of his daily routine. Stangl's defense crumbled under the weight of these testimonies. The sheer scale of the atrocities committed under his watch, combined with his calculated efficiency, left no room for doubt. He was convicted of crimes against humanity and sentenced to life imprisonment. In this narrative, we imagine a more immediate and dramatic conclusion to Franz Stangl's story, a public trial and execution that would serve as a symbol of justice for the nearly 900,000 Jews murdered at Treblinka. Rather than quietly languishing in a German prison until his death in 1971, this scenario envisions Stangl facing a public execution shortly after his conviction. The execution of Franz Stangl would take place in front of a global audience, representing the collective anger of a world that had witnessed the unthinkable horrors of the Holocaust. The courtroom where he was sentenced would become a stage for justice, where the world would finally confront one of the last remaining architects of genocide. Survivors, families of the victims, and people from all corners of the world would watch as Stangl was led to the gallows, his crimes laid bare for all to see. As the noose tightened around his neck, Stangl would finally face the consequences of his monstrous actions. The man who had once walked the grounds of Treblinka, indifferent to the mass murder unfolding before him, would now be held accountable for every life he had taken. His execution would not bring back the dead, nor could it undo the unimaginable pain he had caused, but it would serve as a powerful reminder that justice, though delayed, was still possible. In this imagined scenario, Stangl's execution would be more than just a punishment. It would be a reckoning with history. The trial and execution of one of the Holocaust's most notorious figures would symbolize the end of an era where the architects of genocide could no longer hide behind bureaucratic excuses or false identities. The world would see that those responsible for the worst crimes in human history would not escape unpunished. The legacy of Franz Stangl is one of darkness, death, and destruction. As the commandant of Treblinka, he oversaw the mechanized murder of nearly 1 million innocent people. His role in the Holocaust cannot be overstated, and the scars he left on history will never heal. While Stangl's life ended in prison, in reality, his trial and conviction were a significant victory for justice, offering some solace to the survivors and families of the victims. But his legacy serves as a stark warning to future generations about the dangers of blind obedience to ideology and the dehumanization of others. Stangl's story is a reminder that even ordinary men can become instruments of unimaginable evil when they abandon their humanity in the pursuit of power. And though justice for the victims of Treblinka came too late for many, the capture and conviction of Franz Stangl remain a powerful symbol of the world's determination to never forget the horrors of the Holocaust.